Good morning, I'm Maiki Oreta and you're watching Business 360, where we break down the numbers, connect the dots, and give you the developments and the insights you need to navigate, adapt, and lead. Let's dive right in. Philippine and U.S. officials hold high-level trade talks in Washington, seeking common ground on tariff reforms. President Marcos defers to regional wage boards on petitions for a 200 peso daily pay increase. Hotel bookings in the Philippines jump over 200% as local travel demand continues to climb. Apple CEO Tim Cook says Trump's tariffs could add $900 million to costs in the third quarter. Let's take a look at how financial markets performed overnight. Wall Street rallied on Thursday, boosted by strong earnings from big tech that lifted investor confidence. All three major indices kicked off the month in positive territory, led by Meta Platforms and Microsoft, whose upbeat quarterly results helped drive gains, particularly in the NASDAQ.
What is driving stocks higher today is tech earnings. So we saw last week we got Google and we got ServiceNow, and both of those companies beat in terms of not just earnings but revenues and raised guidance. And now what we've received from Wall Street and from the tech sector is Microsoft. That was a great report. We had been adding to the stock on April 3rd. In the midst of peak tariff chaos at about $370 a share. And of course, we're happy we did, but I think you still want to own this stock from here.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 0.2%, the S&P 500 higher by 0.6%, while the tech-heavy NASDAQ jumped about 1.5%. European markets also ended higher. The UK's FTSE 100 up with, flat with a slight upward bias, up by less than 0.1%. Germany's DAX higher by 0.3%, and France's CAC 40 higher by 0.5%. Philippine ambassador to the United States, Jose Manuel Romualdez, hosts a business forum in Washington, D.C., attended by Trade Secretary Cristina Roque and Presidential Economic Advisor Frederick Go. Also present were representatives from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. ASEAN Business Council, and the Semiconductor Industry Association of America. The ambassador shared photos from the event on social media, saying they continue to spread the message that the Philippines is open for business. No further details have been released. Roque and Go are currently in the United States to negotiate the 17% tariff imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump on Philippine exports. The Department of Agriculture assures that Filipino industries will not be put at a disadvantage as the Philippines negotiates lower tariffs with the United States. Agriculture Secretary Francisco T. Laurel Jr. says any deal on tariff reductions will not automatically lead to a surge in imports, but may simply shift purchases to the U.S. instead of traditional suppliers like Brazil. The statement comes as the Philippines seeks relief from the recent 17% tariff imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump on Philippine exports. The White House has temporarily lowered that rate to 10% for 90 days, but the window for negotiation remains tight. For exporters and import-reliant sectors, the outcome of these talks could impact trade flows, supply chains, and pricing strategy. Business leaders are watching closely as the Philippines navigates tariff diplomacy amid a more protectionist United States trade posture and a shifting global economic order. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. reaffirms his support for the current wage-setting system as pressure builds for a 200 peso across-the-board wage hike pushed by labor groups. The president points out that since July last year, 16 regions have already raised their minimum wages through the regional wage board system. He stresses that any wage increase must be carefully studied to avoid unintended impacts on businesses and the broader economy. In Metro Manila, the wage board is expected to start public consultations soon for a possible new wage order following its last adjustment in July of 2024. Data from the National Wages and Productivity Commission shows that Metro Manila has the highest daily minimum wage for non-agricultural workers at 645 pesos, while Region 9 has the lowest at 414 pesos. The president's position signals a preference for a decentralized approach where regional boards decide wages based on local economic conditions. But with inflation still a concern and only a few session days left in Congress, labor groups are calling for stronger national action. The big question now, can lawmakers deliver relief to workers without triggering layoffs or forcing small businesses to close? Now, the Department of Tourism voices support for the 20 peso per kilo rice program as it rolls out in Cebu, one of the country's top tourist destinations. At the launch of the BBM or Bentang Bigas Meron Na program at the Cebu provincial capital, Tourism Secretary Cristina Frasco calls the initiative a symbol of unity and community pride, saying that making basic goods affordable is essential to building a welcoming, stable society. She highlights President Marcos's commitment to delivering people-centered programs through coordination across government agencies. Also present during the event were Agriculture Secretary Francisco Tu Laurel and Cebu Governor Gwen Garcia. The 20 peso rice program is part of a broader effort to address food security and livelihood. And even the tourism sector is backing it, seeing affordable staples as key to strengthening communities and regions that drive the country's image and economy. Now, the Department of Finance reviews a possible end to the tax-free policy on small online purchases after local retailers warn of unfair competition from foreign e-commerce players. Finance Secretary Ralph Recto says that they are re-evaluating the de minimis rule, which allows imported items valued at 10,000 pesos or less to enter duty and tax-free. The threshold has been in place since 2016 under the Customs Modernization and Tariff Act. Recto says he understands the concerns of local retailers who argue that foreign sellers avoid tax while domestic brands shoulder full compliance. They also warn that the government is losing billions in potential revenue. The Philippine Retailers Association is calling for the rule to be scrapped, saying it creates a distorted market and gives foreign platforms a free pass at the expense of homegrown enterprises. The review comes amid growing demand for a level playing field in digital trade, with policymakers balancing consumer access, tax fairness, and support for local MSMEs. For the business community, any change to the de minimis rule could signal a broader shift toward tighter digital regulation and a push to defend local industry in the cross-border e-commerce era. More billionaires are entering the political arena, sparking questions about whether business leadership prepares one for public office. As the trend of wealthy business figures seeking elected posts continues to grow, it adds new layers to long-standing questions around conflict of interest, political influence, and economic power. Sujin Kim takes a closer look at this rising phenomenon and what it could mean for voters and the overall political system.
According to experts, campaign spending has a direct impact on Philippine GDP movement in the second quarter.
Maybe it's only by 0.3 to 0.5 percentage points, and this is mainly because of the increased consumption of both goods and services, particularly in the following sectors like food, retail, transport, logistics, and media.
Kung aabot man yan ng halimbawa malapit-lapit sa 100 billion, ano bang impact niya sa ekonomiya? Kasi medyo, may konting pick-up, yes. No? Kasi kung 100 billion, no? Although that's a very rough estimate, no? Mga niyan, kung 100 billion, that is just around 0.2 to 0.3 of the economy. 0.2 to 0.3% of the economy. Kahit pa paano may konting dagdag, di ba? Kung economic growth, di ba, ngayon, malapit-lapit sa 6%, magdadagdag ng mga 0.2 to 0.3.
These expenditures are funneled into ad materials, event logistics, and election-related supply chains that accelerate activity during the campaign season. With heightened spending comes stronger consumer confidence, especially in credit markets.
Like credit card receivables, they've been growing like 30% consistently, even prior to the election factor. No? And, overall consumer loans have grown like around 25% year on year.
However, the increase in demand could create inflationary pressures, particularly in key urban markets.
The bigger risk here is when supply becomes suddenly tight, na? Then prices can spike disproportionately, particularly in urban and logistical hubs.
And the economic effect does not end on election day.
It's actually real. It actually happens because after the surge of demand, particularly in Q1 and Q2, the succeeding quarters would see a softer private consumption because services production are now normalizing. So it's typically shaving around 0.2 to 0.4 percentage points of quarter-on-quarter momentum.
Meanwhile, a growing number of bilyonaryos and business tycoons are now running for public office.
These people do have the capability to launch a nationwide campaign and at the same time are educated enough with certain degrees, certain training in order for them to perform the job. However, the challenge here is to really draw the line, a thick line, a delineate between their private practice and their government service.
If they apply private sector discipline to public governance, the impact could be transformational, especially in attracting investments and job creation.
Kung ma-replicate yung skills, no, sa pag-manage sa mga malalaking negosyo, naging successful, at i-replicate yon sa pamahalaan, paghikayat din ng maraming mga negosyante na mamuhunan dito sa ating bansa and the environment that is required. So dapat mas nauunawaan nila yon. Lilikaya ng maraming trabaho, maraming oportunidad.
But both economists stress that the line between public interest and private gain must never be crossed.
Kung talagang gusto nila maglingkod at successful na sila sa kanilang kapasidad, dapat may check and balances yan eh. Kung baka gamitin nila yan for their own interest as against yung interest na paglalaban nila yung for the general public, no? The public good.
In this election, the vote is not just a choice of candidates. It is a decision on the future direction of the economy, from GDP upticks to loan growth, from temporary inflation to a post-election dip. The impact of midterm polls will reverberate throughout markets and households. Sujin Kim, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
Vice President Sara Duterte claims that President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s order to investigate Prime Water Infrastructure, a company owned by the Villar family, is politically motivated. In an ambush interview, the Vice President suggests that the move could be linked to her recent endorsement of Las Piñas Representative Camille Villar for the Senate.
Dahil lahat naman ng galawan ngayon ng administrasyon ay dahil sa politika. So wala na akong nakita na ginawa ng administrasyon na ito para sa kapayapaan at kaunlaran ng ating bayan. Kundi lahat ay mag-atake lang sa politika at sa mga tao hindi nila kaya takutin at hindi nila kaya bilhin.
Malacanang earlier said that the president ordered the investigation over complaints of poor service and high rates in prime water served areas, adding that water service should never be a business of suffering. Senator Francis Tolentino wants straight answers from the Chinese embassy over allegations of Beijing's attempt to influence Philippine elections. The Chinese embassy has denied the claim, saying it does not interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. But Tolentino, who chairs the Senate Special Committee on Maritime and Admiralty Zones, says that the embassy is dodging the issue and avoiding a direct response.
Totoo ba ito? Hindi. Sinagot ba ito sa text nyo? Hindi. Totoo ba itong kontrata with Infinitus? Sinagot ba? Hindi. Totoo ba yung social media reportorial system nila? Ito, People's Republic of China flag. Sinagot ba nila? Hindi. Nililihis nila yung issue. Ayun na nakakulong sa RTC, in Tatarlac, Branch 36, yung nahuli sa Subic. Sinagot ba nila na hindi nila citizens yun? Hindi. Yung nahuli kahapon, pwede kaya nila sagutin yun, yung merong MC Grabber na Chinese ba yun? Spice? Sinagot ba nila? Hindi.
The marketing firm reportedly contracted by the Chinese embassy has been summoned by the NBI, and Tolentino plans to invite them to a Senate hearing in the coming weeks. We're taking a quick break. Please stay with us as we dive deep into the numbers and the narratives that matter most to your bottom line. Welcome back. Let's check on how Asian markets are moving this morning. Right now, most are in the green, except for the Shanghai Composite. The Nikkei 225 is up by 0.6%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is higher by 1.2%. Shanghai's Composite is the only one going the other way so far, down by 0.2%. And Singapore's Straits Times Index is going in the opposite direction of Shanghai's Composite. It's higher by 0.2%. Now, here at home, the Philippine Stock Exchange was closed yesterday for the Labor Day holiday. Let's check on how the main index is performing as trading resumes this Friday morning. As of 10:19 this morning, the main gauge is up by 0.5% to 63.88. The broader all shares index in the green as well, up by 0.3% to 37.39. Out of the sub-indices, the financials, holding firms, property and services counters are in the green, whereas the industrial and mining and oil counters are in the red. It's worth mentioning that the mining and oil counter is down sharply, down by over 2% in early trade, down by 2.4% specifically. Volumes at 84 million and value is a little over 1 billion pesos right now. Now, at the currency market, the peso opened weaker at 55.90 against the greenback, up from its previous close of 55.84. In other news, Ayala-led ASEN Corporation is looking for technical partners to develop its offshore wind projects in the Philippines. ASEN President and CEO Eric Francia says that the company doesn't have the in-house expertise needed for offshore wind and will need to partner to move these projects forward. Francia adds that they are also exploring partnerships as a route to market. Data from the Department of Energy shows ASEN is planning offshore wind projects in Bataan, Cavite, and Batangas with a target capacity of 1,200 Offshore wind is seen as a key piece of the country's energy transition, but it requires global partnerships, strong infrastructure, and long-term policy to support its takeoff. On another front, the Semiconductors and Electronics Industries in the Philippines Foundation Incorporated, or SAPI, is pushing to localize 20 to 25 raw materials currently being imported for electronics manufacturing. Joy Bondoc, Senior Division Manager at Ayala-owned Integrated Microelectronics Incorporated, says the goal is to strengthen the local supply base and reduce dependence on foreign sources. Right now, 90% of raw materials, including plastics, metals, connectors, and chemicals, are still imported. Bondoc says about half of those, mainly from China, the Asia-Pacific region, and Europe, could be produced locally, though, with enough industry support. She adds that localization could reduce production costs by as much as 10% across the sector. The localization drive comes as the Philippines works to deepen its participation in the global tech supply chain while improving self-reliance amid geopolitical risks and shipping disruptions. Electronics remains the country's top export, and industry leaders say strengthening local inputs is crucial to staying competitive. Mining firm OceanaGold remits nearly 500 million pesos in additional government shares, bringing its total payments to the national government to 1.6 billion pesos over the last 2 years. The latest remittance comes on top of 870 million pesos in excise taxes and 512 million pesos in local taxes and fees paid in 2024. Under its agreement with the government, OceanaGold operates the Didipio Gold copper mine in Nueva Vizcaya and Quirino, where the state receives 60% of the net revenue from the project. The company says its contributions, including through the additional government share, or AGS, demonstrate that responsible mining can support long-term economic development. The remittance comes as the Philippines looks to boost mining investments and maximize revenue from its rich mineral resources while ensuring communities and government get a fair share. OceanaGold's agreement is seen as a model for balancing economic returns with environmental and social responsibility as the industry faces growing demand for transparency, sustainability, and fiscal reform. The Bureau of Internal Revenue has issued new rules exempting retirement benefits from income and withholding taxes, provided the benefits come from BIR-qualified private retirement plans. Revenue Regulation number 015-2025, signed by Finance Secretary Ralph Recto and BIR Commissioner Romeo Lumagi Jr., took effect on April 29th. Under the new guidelines, retirement payouts, including pensions, gratuities, and profit sharing, are tax exempt if the employee is at least 50 years old, has served the same employer for at least 10 years, and has not previously availed of tax-exempt retirement. Employers must obtain a certificate of qualification from the BIR within 30 days to access these tax benefits. Investment income earned by retirement funds is also tax-exempt, except for gains from stocks traded on the local exchange, which remain taxable. Employer contributions to retirement funds are deductible from gross income, with excess contributions amortized over 10 years. For Philippine business leaders, these changes offer a strategic opportunity to enhance retirement benefits, optimize tax planning, and strengthen employee retention, particularly amid an aging workforce and growing demand for financial security. Local hotel bookings by Filipinos skyrocket in 2024, with more travelers prioritizing short stays for wellness and relaxation. That's according to a new survey by travel app Klook. Klook Philippines General Manager Michelle Ho says young Filipinos, particularly millennials and Gen Z, are taking time off to mentally reset and unplug. The survey shows most prefer two-night stays at hotels or resorts that include free breakfast and have a pool. It also finds that 45% of respondents book their accommodations 1 to 3 months in advance. Klook's Travel Pulse survey polled 5,000 respondents across the Asia-Pacific, including 500 Filipinos. The majority of users are between 25 and 40 years old. The surge in domestic bookings reflects a strong rebound in local tourism, now fueled by leisure travelers and young professionals, driving spending across hospitality, food, and transportation sectors. We're taking a quick break. Business 360 will be right back. The Department of Transportation is looking into a supposed damaged passport scheme that's now circulating online, involving passengers allegedly being barred from flying due to minor wear and tear on their travel documents. The incident has sparked public outrage and renewed calls for clearer guidelines on passport validity. Our mobility correspondent, G. Baroga, has the details.
After an incident about a supposedly torn passport derailing a trip to Bali, Indonesia went viral, Transport Secretary Vince Dizon was quick to set the record straight. There's no proof yet that the punit passport scam is going on in our airports.
Airlines at sa lahat ng agencies tulad ng BI na humahawak ng passport ng mga kababayan.
In her now viral social media post, Diana Natividad shared that when they arrived at the airport, they went straight to pay their travel tax and everything went smooth. But when they got to the check-in counter, a ground staff member pointed out a small tear in her father's passport. After waiting a while, Diana's aunt went to the senior citizen counter and his father was given a boarding pass right away. But when it was time to board, he was stopped anew. Secretary Dizon clarifies,
Dinobag-check namin sa Bali Airport at kinonfirm nila na nung pinadala ng Cebu Pacific yung screenshot nung state ng yung sitwasyon ng passport nila. Ang Bali mismo ang nagsabi, huwag na po ipasakayin masaya dahil hindi na namin siya.
In an interview on Bilyonaryo News Channel's Agenda, Secretary Dizon reminded travelers to always be extra cautious when it comes to their documents.
Ang meron nga pong authority na humawak sa mga passport ay ang mga airline representatives dahil yun po ay kanilang obligasyon. ayon sa ating mga international air treaties at air regulations at syempre ang immigration officials natin.
To help address passport concerns, the DOTR is teaming up with the Department of Foreign Affairs to roll out help desks at major international airports, NAIA, Cebu, Clark, and Davao.
Kung medyo nagdududa ang mga kababayan natin sa estado ng kanilang passport, meron silang pupuntahan para magtanong at ipakita at ipacheck kung makakalusot ba
yung condition.
itong mga nakikita nilang problema sa passport nila sa kanilang patutunguhang bansa.
Secretary Dizon earlier said they're hoping to have this ready in the next 2 weeks. For BNC Mobility, G. Baroga.
Several lawmakers are sounding the alarm over that supposed torn passport scheme that's gone viral online. Senator Win Gatchalian calls it a serious threat to the Philippines' reputation as a tourist destination, describing the modus as an outright abuse that could erode trust in our airports. He urges authorities to hold those involved accountable and to put security protocols in place to prevent future incidents. OFW Party List Representative Marisa Magsino, meanwhile, advises travelers to stay alert and not to surrender their passports if the process is unclear or unexplained. The controversy comes just as the Philippines ramps up its push to boost tourism and restore confidence in airport operations, making transparency, accountability, and passenger protection more critical than ever. On another front, supporters of former President Rodrigo Duterte gather outside his Davao City residence amid reports that authorities may serve a search warrant at one of the Duterte's family properties.
Nag-abot-abot ang mga tao kagabi o hantod karon kay nai-impo nga naabot sa ila nga ang balay ni Tatay Digong i-search daw mo na karon sa suporta lang po sa mga kuan po, mga katauhan po nga nagmahal po sa ato ang former Rodrigo Roa Duterte. Nag-abot-abot sila po diri nga magbantay sa palibot sa mga.
Congressman Paulo Duterte condemns what he calls harassment, claiming they are monitoring the possible deployment of 30 CIDG operatives and 90 members of the PNP Special Action Force. But CIDG Director Major General Nicolas Torre III denies the allegations. The tension comes ahead of the midterm elections, raising concerns over political stability, rule of law, and injured over 20 others near the SCTEX toll plaza Thursday. Reports say the driver fell asleep at the wheel, prompting criticism over fleet management, working hours, and the enforcement of safety standards. In an interview on Bilyonaryo News Channel's Agenda, Transport Secretary Vince Dizon says that the government will meet with bus operators to push for stronger safety measures and accountability.
Tayo po ngayon ay nagsabi na sa LTFRB na isuspindi na kagad yung Solid North Bus Company effective tomorrow. No, dahil po sa loss of life at sa injury na dinulot nitong kanyang bus at driver dito sa SCTEX. Itatawag po natin silang lahat ang mga bus companies bukas kasama na ang Solid North sa DOTR at talagang haharapin po natin silang lahat.
The incident could trigger tighter regulatory scrutiny across the transport sector, with potential impacts on operator licenses, insurance premiums, and compliance costs. As infrastructure investments grow and mobility demand rises, investors and operators alike face new pressure to balance profitability with public safety. We're taking a short break. Business 360 will be right back. Major shakeup in Washington. U.S. President Donald Trump fires National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, signaling a possible shift in America's foreign and security strategy. Trump named Secretary of State Marco Rubio as acting national security advisor, while announcing he's nominating Waltz to serve as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Waltz, a 52-year-old former lawmaker from Florida, faced internal criticism after he was implicated in the so-called Cignal scandal, mistakenly adding a journalist to a group chat discussing military strikes back in March. The shakeup comes as the White House faces escalating pressure on global security issues, from U.S.-China tensions to Middle East conflicts, with markets now watching for policy shifts that could affect defense spending, trade strategy, and diplomatic alignments. Any change in U.S. security leadership could also have implications for the Asia-Pacific, particularly in areas like the South China Sea, policy, supply chain realignment, and regional defense cooperation. A Russian drone attack sets multiple buildings on fire in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia, intensifying tensions near a region home to one of Europe's largest nuclear power plants. At least 14 people were injured in these strikes on Thursday, but no fatalities have been reported, according to local officials. One man was rescued alive from under the rubble, while 9 others remain hospitalized. The regional governor says Russia launched at least 10 strikes hitting homes, apartment buildings, and educational institutions. Zaporizhia sits near a strategic energy corridor in Ukraine and is home to a nuclear plant that remains a key concern for global markets and European power security. The escalation renews risks to supply chains and infrastructure across Eastern Europe at a time when investors are closely watching geopolitical flashpoints. Now, workers in major economies mark Labor Day with mass demonstrations demanding shorter work hours, stronger pensions, and fairer labor practices amid a global push for more equitable employment standards. In Chile, violent clashes break out in the capital, Santiago, as police use water cannons to disperse protesters who hurled objects and Molotov cocktails at armored vehicles. In Brazil and Mexico, thousands rally to demand a reduction in work hours without losing pay. Brazilian workers in Sao Paulo protest the 6-day work week, while in Mexico, demonstrators call for a shift to a 40-hour work week, down from 48. They're also pushing for better pensions and retirement security. The global push echoes across the Philippines, where lawmakers and business groups remain divided on a proposed 200 peso national wage hike. As inflation, productivity, and the cost of living pressures intensify, global companies operating in the Philippines and across Asia face growing calls to balance competitiveness with fair labor practices, redefining the future of work across supply chains and emerging markets. U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs could add $900 million to Apple's operating costs in its fiscal third quarter, raising questions about supply chains, pricing, and production strategy. Apple CEO Tim Cook made the disclosure during the company's second quarter earnings call, warning that trade tensions are creating significant cost pressures. Most of Apple's iPhone supply chain is still based in China, the primary target of Trump's tariff policy. While Apple has shifted some assembly to India, the U.S. administration continues to press for iPhone production to return to American soil. Apple recently announced a $500 billion investment, which the White House touted as a victory for domestic manufacturing. But most of the funding is focused on server infrastructure for Apple intelligence and training facilities for U.S. tech workers. For global consumers and investors, the cost burden may eventually be passed on, potentially impacting pricing on iPhones, services, and future devices. And for tech suppliers worldwide, including in Southeast Asia, the shift in Apple's manufacturing strategy could signal new opportunities or a further consolidation of power in U.S.-aligned markets. On another front, Britain's future king, Prince William, and his wife Kate take a scenic nature trail in Scotland, spotlighting community engagement and sustainable tourism on the final day of their 2-day visit. The royal couple visited a community forest, meeting families participating in an outdoor learning program. Their trip coincided with their 14th wedding anniversary, which they celebrated quietly on the island of Mull, staying in a self-catering cottage to promote low-impact travel. The visit highlights a growing global shift toward eco-conscious, experience-based tourism. A movement the Philippines is also embracing through community-led nature destinations in Palawan, Siargao, and Mindanao. As travel recovers, destinations that align with sustainability and cultural immersion are becoming more attractive to both high-value tourists and impact-driven investors. Now it's party season on the island of Boracay, one of the Philippines' most iconic tourism destinations. Festivities are underway this weekend, drawing locals, visitors, and global attention. Paolo Barcelon takes us to the heart of this year's celebration.
Donna and her workmates from Sarangani are just among some of those catching a quick run at Boracay's beachfront. What brings them back to the island is the pristine waters and white sand of one of the world's best tourist destinations.
Napakaganda ng scenery, especially itong white sand, and then may mga activities sila, and then yung nightlife.
The same holds true for visitors like Roylan and for content creators like Darren.
Ito pa rin yung sand. Yun talaga nakakaawa. Kasi napakaganda ng buhangin. Tapos na talaga mapipil mo na nasa isla ka. Kasi hindi naman yung daily life natin medyo, sabi nga, medyo busy. Yun ating hinahanap yung relaxation.
Ang sarap dito mag-relax. Ang sarap. Ang daming pwedeng maging activities dito sa Boracay. Ang daming pwedeng gawin. Bukod sa pwede siyang pangbata, pwede siyang pangmatanda, pangbata. Kahit anong edad, safe na safe dito sa Boracay.
Parties are also back in the island, this time done with care and environmental protection in mind. AirAsia Philippines held the first night of its Love Boracay events, headlined by celebrities such as Kaya, Denise Julia, The Ones, and OPM icons Itchy Worms. AirAsia Philippines says these events are also one of the prime movers to drive more local tourists, especially younger travelers.
We democratize air travel, meaning yung sa pinakamurang halaga na safest possible para makarating kayo sa Boracay, and that's AirAsia. And hindi lang naman siya flights. Siyempre, meron din kami mga partner hotels. So, yung kanilang stay sa Boracay, siyempre lalo na yung mga Gen Zs or millennials na always on a budget. Yan. Of course, you fly with AirAsia, you fly with confidence, with peace of mind.
The airline is also hosting promos such as its 544 peso one-way base fare promo, in a bid to bring more tourists to Boracay. Last year, AirAsia Philippines brought over 1.3 million tourists to the island via both Caticlan and Calibo airports. The local government is eyeing to get over 2 million tourists this year from different economic backgrounds. The low-cost carrier has also increased flights to 81 per week from the previous 70 to cater to more passengers. Aside from luxurious stays in the island's hotels and resorts, the local government is also trying to attract guests on a budget.
Akala nila, Boracay, mahal, no? Mayroon pa rin mamamura dyan. So it's a matter only of informing the tourists na hindi naman mahal ang Boracay. It depends on your choice. Kung gusto mo mahal, meron mura, meron dyan. So it depends on your budget.
Changes implemented during the first rehabilitation of Boracay, such as beach cleanliness, constant monitoring of the island's water quality, and maintaining public order are also still being done to ensure a closure of the island will never happen again. Back in 2018, then-President Rodrigo Duterte ordered a closure, calling the tourist destination a cesspool.
And that's it for Business 360. I'm Maiki Oreta. Thank you for joining us. Keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo news channel, and have a good weekend.